Greetings, friends. So the balanced data slate is out, and it's time for the age-old question, and boy have I made this video before, but let's talk about Sanguinary Guard. Let's talk about the tried and tested Death Company with the Chaplain, with Lamartes. Still the cheaper option in terms of points, but have these guys got some legs on the tabletop? I've been fielding them with Commander Dante, which no one is playing, but I want to tell you what I think about them after a few games. I want to dive into a ton of maths. This video is going arms and legs, so it's going to be a long one. But by the end of it, you should be able to safely say, yes, I'm including Sanguinary Guard in my army, or no. We're just going back to these guys, because these guys are still good, they're still cheaper, and in some cases, they still get -1 damage. So let's get into this week's tactics video. So if you are just meeting, my name is John. Every week I will be here telling you how to be a better Blood Angels player and helping you decide what units make it into your army list. So let's talk about the Sanguinary Guard and the Death Company survivability when they are being shot. We have Warp Spiders doing 8.5 wounds against Dante and the Sanguinary Guard and 8.9 against the Death Company and the Chaplain. I kind of thought because of the dev wounds that the Sanguinary Guard would actually perform one worse against the Warp Spiders. So it's about the same. Bear in mind, Sanguinary Guard are more expensive, so actually, statistically, you're probably slightly better off with the Death Company. But interesting to see that they actually don't perform too bad with that 2-up save. Now, with Lamartes, there would be no difference here, because these are 1 damage weapons. If we jump over to these Plague weapons, like the Plague Spewers from the Death Guard, AP2, 1 damage, Anti-Infantry 2-up. Again, these are 1 damage weapons. So again, the Death Company are worse than the Sanguinary Guard, but it's tiny. It's a tiny amount. It's like 10%. Against something like a Splinter Cannon, that is an anti-infantry venom on the Drukhari being 2 damage, the Sanguinary Guard are a little bit better than the Death Company, but I guess if you had Lamartes in there, then they would eclipse it. And this is the thing with Lamartes. Like, I ran him in a lot of battles, but there are situations where that -1 damage doesn't come into play. So you are paying 50-something extra points for Lamartes, and sometimes he doesn't give you any benefit in the defensive capability. And that's kind of what I wanted to look at. I suppose in some ways it's the same as the Sanguinary Guard don't get any benefit to being shot, but they do get a bit of benefit in terms of survivability when we're in melee. So that's what I want to sort of dive into. And there's going to be a lot of maths here, right? So with Armor of Contempt, Dante plus the Sanguinary Guard only take 1 damage, 1 wound, statistically, from 2 Venom Splinter Cannons. The Death Company would take 1.85, but again with Lamartes, they would be slightly ahead. Against, for example, Plague Sprayers, then again, the Sanguinary Guard are ahead. So although the Sanguinary Guard kind of cost 10% more points than the Lamartes squad, against 2 damage weapons, Lamartes is still going to be much better, right? Against 1 damage, potentially, or anything else than 2, potentially, the Sanguinary Guard are going to maybe do okay. So, Sanguinary Guard against the Psy Cannons, 1.66 failed saves. Death Company against the Psy Cannons, 1.85 failed saves. So this is 1 Psy Cannon that would basically be 6 shots. They're hitting on 3, so it's 4 hits. This is how many saves you get. So damage-wise, the Death Company would average 5, but this would basically kind of kill 2 models. Sorry, the Sanguinary Guard would average 5, would kind of kill 2 models. The Death Company would also kind of get 2 models killed, but with Lamartes, there would be a chance, I guess, that one of those models only took a wound, and if it was the first model, then they would actually only lose 1 model, which would be a lot better. So Lamartes coming into zone here against potentially 3 damage weapons. If we use Armor of Contempt, bearing in mind that Armor of Contempt is better with a better save, you can see here the Armor of Contempt makes a big difference. Now the Sanguinary Guard against the Psy Cannons are only statistically failing 1.1 saves. So really you're only going to fail 1 save. Maybe on a good day you don't fail that 1 save. The Sanguinary Guard are pretty good with Armor of Contempt. We know that. What's interesting though would be if you could also play Go to Ground here. Obviously you can't against Psy Cannons because they ignore cover, but another weapon that didn't ignore cover, AP2 can be pretty devastating against the Death Company. Right? When you have to save on 5s, it kind of feels bad. Very rarely do you make a lot of saves against 5s, but the Sanguinary Guard, for example, if you did use both strats, then suddenly you can save on suddenly you can save on 2s against a strength 10 weapon or something, and suddenly it actually can kind of maybe flip things in your favor, especially if the opponent was going to be shooting your Sanguinary Guard with 2 or 3 units. Suddenly if you pay that 2 CP on them, so they're still saving on 2s against AP2, could actually be a bit of a swing. They're not sure if they want to keep shooting them. You roll hot, you don't roll any 1s, and you're laughing. You know, sometimes, like I said, sometimes you take 10 units out of transport, roll 10 dice, and you don't take a single mortal wound, right? You don't always roll 1s. It happens. So, using both strats on the Sanguinary Guard, if you did this against the if you were able to do that against an AP2, then you're down to only failing 0.55% saves. So just over half a failed save against 4 strength 10 successful wounds. So there might be something to say, if you're using your stratagems to keep the Sanguinary Guard alive in the shooting phase, that might actually be really valuable, because they might do okay in the combat phase. And let's face it, Sanguinary Guard are going to need to be obscured, right? We know toughness 4 models die so fast. They're going to need to be obscured. You're probably going to put them in reserve. You're probably going to rapid ingress them. So you're going to bring them in from rapid ingress. You're going to move them 12 inches. You're going to shoot 11 Infernal Pistols plus Dante's sustained Infernal Pistol, and then you're going to make the charge. And you're going to see how well you get on with that. And then if they're still alive and they killed their charge target, and they probably should kill their charge target, because I've got some maths on that in here in a second, is it worth paying some CP in the shooting phase to keep a large squad of them alive? Probably. So yes, Lamartis is much better against 3 damage weapons. On paper, yes. Potentially you might be able to reduce 3 damage to 2, and then the feel no pain. So if you want to roll a 6 on 2 dice, so you're rolling 2 dice and you need a single 6, the chance of that is 30%. So basically, like, if you were hit with those psi cannons and you failed 2 or 3 saves, on each time you roll 2 dice, you have a 30% chance to pass 1 and not lose a model, because you would just take 1 damage because they feel no pain. But here's, on paper, that is strong. But I think a 6-up feel no pain is not as good as we maybe need for those Death Company models. Because, you know, how often can you, if you've got to save on 6s, you know, like your Land Raider was hit by like Death Guard las cannons that are -4, and you need to make 3 saves on 6s, how often do you fail all 3 of them? You know, how often do you actually pass the double 6? Sometimes it happens, but you could go through whole games where that doesn't happen. So, while Lamartis is good, and -1 damage is subjectively good in most situations, because it's on such a singular dice roll, same as I'm saying, like, sometimes you can go and roll no 1s, sometimes you can go and roll no 6s, and when that happens, it's actually kind of devastating. The toughness 4 Marines are tough to play. You need to be obscuring them. You need to be making charges and then trying to get consolidated into cover or another weaker unit that's not going to hurt them. In practice, it's very difficult to do. I think it's very difficult for Blood Angels to field these big squads of guys, considering how costly they are, and keep them alive. So let's move on to like the melee, because that's what's probably important, right? The Sanguinary Guard are going to jump into melee, or the opponent's going to try and jump them. How do they do when they're led by the Warlord? They're -1 to hit, and they're -1 to wound. So let's say we're fighting that Mega Knobs 40 attack, strength 10, -2 damage. So a Death Company with a Chaplain would actually take 20 damage from that Mega Knob squad. If it was Lamartas, they would take 10. The Sanguinary Guard would only take 8. The -1 to hit and -1 to wound coming in huge there, I guess, right? If we're fighting Plague Marines with those heavy weapons, -3 AP, but only hitting on 4s, again, Sanguinary Guard doing very well here, only losing 2.2 wounds. The Death Company are losing 4.6. Lamarta's making them lose only 2.3, but even Lamarta's is not hitting the Death Company numbers here. So Death Company into... So basically, if your opponent already has a poorish to hit, the -1 to hit here is kind of big. And then Eviscerators, right, from the 8 bound. I purposely put the 8 bound in because they hit on 2s. So the -1 to hit has the least effect on these guys. They do 5 wounds against the Sanguinary Guard. They do 9 wounds against the Death Company. Lamarta is bringing these Death Company up a little bit. So what if we put in Armor of Contempt? Because we were talking about using Armor of Contempt on high armor saves being the most valuable. Then suddenly 40 Power Fist, Strength 10 Power Fists essentially coming out from the Mega Knobs is only going to kill 3 Sanguinary Guard with Armor of Contempt. Pretty big. Whereas it would be killing 16 wounds of Death Company, or with the Martas it would be killing 4 models. So this is, I guess, the point. Lamartas is good, but Sanguinary Guard, I guess if you get them into melee and people have to start hitting them, and they're not using, I guess their big weakness possibly is devastating wounds, but they didn't do too bad against those Warp Spiders. Against the Plague Marines with Armor of Contempt, we're barely even losing 1 guy. I mean, I guess this isn't a full squad of Plague Marines, this is just a couple of guys with those big heavy weapons, but that is the most damaging part of the squad. And then this is a 3-man squad of Eviscerators. They'd only do 3.3 wounds against the Sanguinary Guard here. They do 7 against the Death Company and 3.5 against Lamartas. So here is like a situation where you've got 2 damage weapons here, and do you know what? All these are 2 damage weapons. So in 3 of the situations, the Knobs and the 8-bound, sorry, in 2 of the situations, the Knobs and the 8-bound, oh, no, I'm lying to you. In all 3 situations, against 2 damage weapons, the Sanguinary Guard are actually more survivable than the Death Company with Lamartas. And that just comes on the Sanguinary Guard having that good save, which we can buff with Armor of Contempt, and then the -1 to hit and the -1 to wound. So I guess like in any situation, in any of the games that you've played, where your Death Company have not killed your opponent, and your opponent has swung back, or your opponent has countercharged you, or something like that, Dante plus the Sanguinary Guard are probably going to be well worth the Armor of Contempt usage. I guess if you've got the Captain in there to get it for free, it's going to be well worth it. And these guys are going to out-survive the Death Company, even with the -1 damage, just because the -1 to hit and wound. And this is why I think Sanguinary Guard are only going to work in 1 squad. They're too expensive to work in 1 squad anyway, but the Warlord does help them a bit here. What if we came into like some more weapons, like Assault Marines with AP1, Drukhari Clavies, I think this is from Incubi, AP2 2 damage, and Howling Banshees, a high AP weaponry, AP3 1 damage. So, in this situation, against all these weapons, so these are kind of low AP weapons, and every single unit here hits on 3s. So low AP weapons, hitting on 3s, low strength weapons, the Sanguinary Guard do a hell of a lot better than Death Company. It's like a third against the Assault Marines, because everything would just be getting saved on like 3s, and it would be hard to hit and wound. You'd be hitting on 4s and wounding on 5s. The Howling Banshees, again, hitting on 4s, wounding on 5s, so you're only losing like 3 against a 10-man squad of Howling Banshees. That's 30 AP3 attacks coming in. You're only losing 3 models. And I guess the 2 damage weapons, sure, Lamartas pulls ahead ever so slightly here. But then I think the thing with the 2 damage weapons is sometimes Lamartas, to me, can feel like a difficult unit to play, right? Because, like, you have to kind of say, I want you to hit my Lamartas unit with 2 damage weapons, and everybody knows he's -1 damage, so they all want to use their 1 damage weapons against him. It's just tricky, right? If we use Armor of Contempt into Assault Marines, so 40 attacks from Assault Marines kill 1 Sanguinary Guard. And you can see here that basically Lamartas makes them keep up on the 2 damage weapons, but against everything else, low strength, high AP, low AP, the Sanguinary Guard are miles ahead. So I guess if you can tag another unit with your Sanguinary Guard and maybe consolidate into potentially, like, you know, capture guys so they can't move away without like a desperate escape or something, and basically keep them in combat so your opponent can't shoot the Sanguinary Guard, they can probably survive pretty well, right? You know, like at this point you could actually like pile into a unit of 10 Howling Banshees and be like, yeah, I'm going to lose a couple of Sanguinary Guard, but that's worth it for me wrapping this unit of Howling Banshees, potentially stopping the other Eldar units in the army shooting you. Remember, there is ways to get a 6-inch consolidate with Blood Angels as well. Relentless Onslaught, I believe, is the stratagem. So let's talk about damage output, right? Both squads have 11 Infernal Pistols. If you give the Chaplain an Infernal Pistol, I guess Lamartus is a bolt pistol for whatever reason. But yeah, it's super similar, right? 11 Sanguinary Guard pistols hitting on 83%. 11 Death Company hitters on 88%. So the Death Company have a 6% more damage output, but Dante has a 16% chance to do 2 more hits. And then I guess if you're running Lamartas, you actually have more Infernal Pistols on the Sanguinary Guard. This is so confusing, actually. But yes, there's nothing in it. The Infernal Pistols from both squads are basically going to do the same. The only time it would be relevant, I guess, is if you're -1 to hit. Then the Death Company would pull ahead, because they're re-rolling hits where the Sanguinary Guard, their -1 to hit would just cancel out their +1 to hit, right? But yeah, so this is what you get. You get 40 attacks with swords on the Sanguinary Guard in melee. You get 8 attacks with the Power Fists, and you get 9 attacks with Dante's AP3 weapon here with lethals. I do know it's AP3, and I have done the math on it being AP3. I just typed it wrong in my spreadsheet. There's a lot of slides to go in here. We then did the 10 Death Company with the Chaplain, and don't worry, I've got Lamartas on the next slide. And statistically, this Chaplain will do 1 mortal wound on every activation, so we've added that in for the next slide, and this is what it looks like. So raw damage comparison with the Death Company, the Chaplain, and the Death Company with Martas. So again, it's just toughness for 3-up Marines. The Sanguinary Guard are slightly ahead of the Death Company with the Chaplain, but Lamartas' squad is ahead there. Against Death Shroud Terminators, the Death Company of the Chaplain are actually the most damaging unit here because of the +1 to wound. Lamartas and the Sanguinary Guard, there's very little in it. Against Talos, again, the Death Company with +1 to wound here are the most damaging unit, beating the Sanguinary Guard out by 18%, beating out like Lamartas' squad by like 10%. Against the Lord of Change, again, it's the Death Company with the Chaplain. So I guess if you're just trying to run a squad that's going to do like maximum damage output, a lot of the time, and don't want to spend CP on it, a lot of the time it's going to be this cheaper Death Company with the Chaplain. At 355 points, this is a very damaging unit. It's not a survivable unit, it's even less survivable, but it's very damaging. So you've got Lord of Change, 48% more damage than the Sanguinary Guard. It's a break point here on the strength, because toughness 10. Lamartas' lethal hit squad is actually doing pretty well. And against the Land Fortress, again, the Death Company with +1 to wound are kind of keeping up with the lethal hits. So when you start looking at this, +1 to wound versus lethal hits is actually way more similar in terms of damage output for the Death Company than I realized. And I guess that's because if you're re-rolling your hits, which is a third of your dice, a third of the 40 attacks or the 48 attacks you're going to get total will potentially get re-rolled into another lethal hit. So that's why Lamartas plus the lethal hits very much, in the most sense, keeps up with the +1 to wound. Like it's potato. They're very similar. The Sanguinary Guard are good at killing stuff below their strength of 7, right? So potentially elite infantry that are below strength 7, the Sanguinary Guard are very good at killing. They're going to fall off a bit up here, and I guess up here you're going to need to use Red Rampage, which we kind of knew that you were going to need to use anyway. So when you do Red Rampage, that's when things start to get interesting, right? The Sanguinary Guard kill a lot more. Marines, they actually kill a lot more. 16% Death Shroud Terminators, maybe slightly less against the Lamartas squad, and it's worth noting that for this third slide, I've inputted the numbers for Red Rampage for both the Death Company as well. So these guys are getting the Red Rampage bonuses too. Against the Talos, again, it's the Sanguinary Guard out damaging just 6%. Against the Lord of Change, the Death Company are out damaging 5%. And then against the Land Fortress, Death Company the Sanguinary Guard are actually out damaging 17%. And I think it's because of the AP3 from Dante is helping here quite a bit. And also weight of attacks, right? So why do the Sanguinary Guard and Dante do more damage against 4 out of the 5 options here? Especially because they have no rerolls, right? I mean, we could give them rerolls, which would increase their damage even more. If you knew and you were confident to use Oath of Moment on their target, it would be even better. I haven't included Oath of Moment here. It would probably actually buff these damage values by about 16%, because it would take you from an 83% chance to hit to a 97% chance to hit, like I said earlier in the video. But I think my point was, by adding Dante, Yes, you're going to have to spend CP on Red Rampage. Yes, you're going to have to spend CP on Armor of Contempt. But you're going to make your charges a lot more reliable because you've got that +1, especially after a rapid ingress. And you're also going to make... You're not going to need to use Oath on their target. I mean, you could use Oath on their target, but I think my point was you're not going to need to use Oath on their target. Let's use Oath on something elsewhere that's going to really need Oath. A unit with 57 attacks hitting on 2s probably doesn't need Oath, right? It's still going to make like 50 hits or something like that. 83%, 20% off 57. Quick math is like 46. You're still going to make like 46 hits. You still need to use Oath? I mean, dropping 11 hits sucks. You could still use it to get probably 10 of those 11 back, but you're still going to make 46 hits, I guess is my point. I mean, the Death Company with rerolls still do make some misses, right? And the Death Company have that 46 attacks, so it's probably about 40 with the rerolls. So in this case, the Sanguinary Guard actually do pretty well with Red Rampage. They kill everything. You know, they even kill... They actually overkill the Land Fortress, right? Land Fortress only got 16 wounds. They just flat out did 30 wounds to it. Yes, it's 10 Sanguinary Guard plus Dante, but it is just an instant kill from full health. Potentially you could wrap it with 10 guys as well. There could be an advantage to that. If it's full of guys inside, they're going to have to desperate escape. Right? Okay, so, and then the other thing I guess to consider is, when the squad is dead, what are you left with? Right? Once the squad is gone, which happens way too much for my liking, I can preach all day about Toughness 4 Marines being bad and they die too fast. What are you left with? You're left with Dante, a Chaplain, or Lamartez, right? That would be the three options. The Chaplain's the cheapest. Lamartez is pretty good, but loses a lot when he's not with a squad. Dante is pretty good when he's on his own, right? So, like I said, if there's only one Sanguinary Guard alive with Dante, then you're still at OC4. AP3 from Dante's weapon is damn possible for Blood Angels to obtain in melee. Mephiston has AP3, but he's a joke because he's got damage, D3 damage, so he never does any damage. There's only like 3 units in the Codex that have AP3. I think it's Astaroth, Dante, Mephiston, and the Death Company Dreadnought. No one's running Astaroth and Mephiston. So there's 2 units that have AP3. Dante also has lethals, which is very nice with this 2+ to hit. And his pistol is significantly better than anything the Chaplain or Lamartez could come up with, right? The Chaplain and Lamartez also lose any rerolls that they would have, essentially, when they're not leading the squad. They lose their Feel No Pain as well. They're also they're more vulnerable to being sniped because they have less wounds as well. The regular Chaplain is honestly kind of poor on his own, I feel like. Unless you give him a Power Fist, because the Crozius being only AP seems pretty bad. 1 AP seems like it's pretty bad. I think that, like, if you are just left with one of those 3 characters, Dante is the one that's going to do the most by himself. 9 attacks means he can still slaughter whole squads by himself. His pistol means that he can one-shot characters potentially by himself. And yeah, when the squads get whittled away to only a few guys left, then it's still an OC threat, whereas when the Death Company have like 3 guys left, they're no threat on OC, right? So what's the weight on the OC? You know, like, how many points more do we feel like everybody having 2 OC is worth? Because there is value in that. But what's my overall thoughts, right? We looked at their survivability, we looked at their damage output, we looked at their OC, and I think the takeaway I have is that Sanguinary Guard are at least now in the realms of playable since the data slate. I think running more than one squad of 10 is simply too costly, and they need to be led by the Warlord to get the full benefit from them. Because that's the only way that they're really keeping up and surviving as well as the Death Company, and that surviving in melee combat is somewhat decent. There's still value in Armor of Contempt. There's a lot of value in the Armor of Contempt and Go to Ground in the shooting phase. But they do need Red Rampage in a bunch of situations. But they also do need a way to buff their hit roll, right? And I guess Dante, to me, feels like the easy way out here, right? Like, I want Red Rampage. I understand a captain will give me that for free, but then I have to pick my Oath of Moment target. And maybe Dante lets me free up that Oath of Moment elsewhere. I guess the question is, do you think Oath of Moment is better than 1 CP? Because back in the day, we used to have stratagems like that. Reroll hits against a unit would probably cost 1 CP. So I guess it's just a playstyle determination there. There could be an argument as well, though, like when the squad is dead, is Dante on his own better than a single jump captain? The jump captain is cheaper. Is Dante better? Probably. I said a few weeks ago, the data slate hasn't changed too much for Blood Angels, right? You're probably still best spamming Death Company. The foot slogging ones are the overpowered ones because they have sustained hit 2. If you fight on death when they all die, every model has sustained hit 2. And the jump pack ones, for the most part, are very versatile, but they did get a points increase, even though I think they were probably fine where they were. You can now at least put your squad of Sanguinary Guard and Dante in your list, and you will not hate yourself for doing so. Should you include more than 1 Sanguinary Guard? No. If you're running Sanguinary Guard in your list, I'd love to hear all about it in the comments section. I think, because as much as I like to win the game, I am also not ever a player that spams 3 of the same unit. I don't think I have ever spammed 3 of the same unit. I think, actually, telling a lie, the one time I had 3 Death Company units was when we had that secondary in 9th edition, where it was like, it was a secondary that was all about Death Company. You got points for killing with Death Company, you got points for Death Company units dying. So that's the only time I ever ran 3 units of Death Company, and I think in that list, that was like all my melee. I didn't run Vanguard Vets, I didn't run Sanguinary Guard. I like having a varied army. Having not been able to play the Sanguinary Guard it's been like 11 months, right? Like it was like June or July last year that they got the 10th edition rules came out for them. They're way too expensive. And also Devastating Wounds was a huge problem for them back then. I guess with Devastating Wounds being kind of like Mortals overflowing on model for model. So a lot has changed since then. They are still very expensive, so I think you have to deep strike them and rapid ingress them. 430 points make it very restrictive, I think, as well, to take another 10-man squad, unless you're taking jump intercessors, because they are very cheap at 160. If you're wanting to run 10 Sanguinary Guard and 10 Death Company, that's a huge points investment. It's basically half your army now. I think that's very, very tricky to do, but I think I'm going to continue running the Sanguinary Guard. I think the damage output seems fun. I know they're survivable a bit more now in melee. I've run Lamartes plus the Death Company a lot. I like it. I do like it, but I do think it has some weaknesses, especially if you're playing like Eldar or Drukhari, that can do like tons of 1 damage, high AP at you very, very quickly, all anti-infantry, etc. Or dev wounds. So based on that, I guess I'm playing Sanguinary Guard. Thank you so much for watching what I'm sure is a behemoth video. I recorded this in like 3 parts, so this got to be like close to an hour. Thank you so much for getting to the end. I hope it's been informative. I feel like it's not definitive though, right? Like there's still a very good argument for like Death Company are cheaper with Lamartes. They hit harder for the most part. You can just run them. But hey, Commander Dante's a fan favorite, right? He's AP3. What else have we got that's AP3? It's pretty fun rolling his 9 attacks, and it's nice to have him back on the tabletop. I so wish he just had one more good rule, or he was the same points as Azrael, right? But maybe when our codex comes, we'll finally get Dante to be in a great position. He's in somewhat of an okay position right now. I think 430 for the unit is probably still 10 or 20 points too high. I think they could come down 20 points and still be fine. They're so expensive. I think we'll probably see that, right? Like Games Workshop have this habit of doing like small increments on units, especially Sanguinary Guard, because they've really struggled to balance them. And I guess they haven't been balanced in 11 months. And I think basically after the balanced data slate came out, the win rate for Blood Angels has already plummeted. From what I understand, it went down like 5% almost overnight since the data slate came out. And I mean, it was, I did mention this in my video about the data slate, it was targeted nerfs at our best units when we were already struggling a little bit to get close to 50%. So I think for now, for Blood Angels, play what you want to play, have fun with the game, don't hate yourself for fielding Sanguinary Guard. Hey, it's fun to chop stuff up with 48 attacks, or if you want to go all in Carmite Blades and roll 50 attacks, hey, that's fun. Put in a bunch of jump intercessors as well, because they're really cheap and fun at the moment right now. Thank you so much for watching to the end. Like the video, subscribe, support me on Patreon for the price of a cup of coffee, and I will continue to stay up till midnight doing millions and millions of formulas and maths, so you guys can hopefully know what units are best to field. Thanks again. I'll catch you next week on the tactics video. By the blood army made strong, my friends. Peace.